Hello and welcome to another Stopping Socialism TV segment. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, joined today by senior editor Chris Talgo. Chris, how are you doing today?
Doing good, Donnie. How are you?
Fantastic. So I'm having you
Good.
on today to talk about a recent op-ed that you penned for the College Fix. The headline is "The Miseducation Movement is Gaining Momentum. Can Parents Stop It?" So the article starts off with a statement, opinion. Over the past few years, far too many American students have been taught revisionist history. So let's start off by establishing your background a bit. So currently, you're a senior editor at the Heartland Institute and a contributor to the Stopping Socialism project, but you weren't always. You used to be a teacher, correct?
Yep. So for 5 years, I taught U.S. history, U.S. Constitution, economics, and American government for high school students in Bluffton, South Carolina.
Oh, very nice. So you said several years?
5 years. Yep.
5 years. All right.
5 long years.
Yeah.
Very long years.
I bet. I bet. I have no desire to be a teacher. My wife teaches, and more power to her. So this topic that you talked about in this op-ed firsthand. So let's first establish the problem. So during your time as a teacher, how would you describe the lesson plans that you taught in regards to U.S. history?
All right. Well, I'll start off with this. So, in the state of South Carolina, we have something that are called like curriculum standards, and what they do is they guide the teacher as to the content that must be covered.
Hmm.
And really, this applies to the state mandated U.S. history test, which all South Carolina students must pass in order to graduate high school. And when I was there, this was 5 years ago now. I would say that the state curriculum standards were pretty fair. I would say they might have leaned a little bit liberal, but I would say overall they were fairly, down the middle. However, what I noticed was that most of the teachers did not abide by those
Hmm.
standards, and a lot of, I would say, the vast majority of them uh, took their personal opinions into the classroom. So it wasn't necessarily the teaching standards that were the problem. In my opinion, it's these teachers who gloss over the teaching standards and then come in with their own rhetoric and propaganda.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, we talk about all the time, just either here on Stopping Socialism TV or just like generally speaking in the kind of the conservative, news realm about like institutions being taken over by, liberals and cultural Marxists and all of that. So you were saying that you kind of saw that firsthand.
Oh, I saw that firsthand, guaranteed. I can give so many examples. For economics, teaching economics, we were supposed to focus exclusively on macroeconomics and microeconomics, and I witnessed, so many times where teachers would come in and they'd show, anti free market documentary about Walmart, for example, or whatever, and that had absolutely nothing to do with what was supposed to be taught to those kids based on the state standards. And that was not just in economics, that was in American history, that was in philosophy, that was in almost every subject across the spectrum in social studies department where I worked.
Wow. And you being more conservative, libertarian, it's not like you only gave the rosy picture
No,
of the United States in your history lessons.
not at all. And first of all, when I was a teacher, my beliefs were off the table because I was there to teach the kids, the basics of history and how to think, how to write, how to communicate ideas. So what I thought in terms of like my perspective, I never brought that into the classroom. I was strictly focused on making sure that they had, the factual background
Hmm.
because, as I've seen, a lot of young adults and a lot of students, they have very little just like a simple understanding of American history. So my foremost goal was to just make sure that they knew what they had to know.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of teachers are not nearly as concerned with that as they are concerned with indoctrinating or brainwashing or just trying to change the political minds of these, very young children.
Hmm. So you say that like a lot of the slant was coming specifically from the teachers, not necessarily the curriculum. However, in the article, you cite a shift in the curriculum towards the end of your teaching career towards a quote revisionist history, which portrayed America as a wicked country. So
Correct.
how so?
So towards the very tail end of my teaching career, that was right around the time when this, revisionist history really started to take hold. And what they did was they focused, I would say, disproportionately on the chapters of American history in which mistakes were made, and they hyper focused on some of our darker chapters, but they were unwilling to explain the progress that we've made.
Hmm.
So, for example, civil rights movement, they would spend very little time talking about the strides that were made, and almost, trying to portray it as, well, only a couple things happened, but we still got so much like room to go. I mean, that's just one example. Uh, I had the experience that many of the teachers come in with a somewhat anti-American bias, and that is perpetuated, when they teach anything from the Great Depression to, the Reagan era, from the Civil War, to the American founding.
Hmm.
They go out of their way to overemphasize some of the things that weren't great, while dismissing the fact that, for the American founding, I mean, that was a seminal moment in world history in which, the 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 landscape of the world changed.
Yeah. Right.
Obviously, it wasn't perfect, but it was, by and large, a great thing that should be celebrated, not denigrated.
Right. A huge step in just like the evolution of humans. Right.
Correct. And just, one other quick thing. So, I also spent some time doing world history and modern world history. And when the time came to talk about the Russian Revolution, it was so different.
Oh.
It was great, but it just wasn't done properly.
Oh yeah.
And it,
Sure, that was a case of cracking a few eggs when you're making an omelet type of a thing, right?
right, right. So they went out of their way to excuse, the terrible sides of, the Marxist revolutions.
Mm,
But when we talk about the American Revolution in particular, it was done in a very different tone.
wow. Yeah, you attribute, a lot of this shift in this article to Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. I think that a lot of people that are listening to this video, that are watching this video, probably know about this book, but for those who aren't, can you briefly describe the point of this book?
So the point of the book is to give a alternative history of the United States seen through the eyes of the oppressors. So, for example, how did Native Americans see the events when, the settlers came?
Oh, sure.
And obviously, when I taught, that era, we talked about how terrible it was, for the Americans to take, some of the Native Americans' lands. However, I think we also need to make sure that we understand that history needs to be taught in context. That was a completely different period.
Mhm.
That was a time in which, like, land was up for grabs. Native Americans were also, warring with each other. So that's just one very small example. But what the book tries to do is it tries to bring a Marxist mentality to American history, and it's gained, wide acclaim, and it's a uh, central in U.S. history teaching.
Right.
It's a required book for AP, and what I noticed is that a lot of the teachers used the book and used many of the lessons plans, which I cited just a couple, as their lesson
Right.
plans.
Yeah, it's crazy because, I've been in this field long enough to see this book specifically be debunked, discredited, rebuked numerous times by a whole host of critics. Yet
Mhm.
the book still has a lasting impact on U.S. history education today, right?
Well, I would say it's actually getting more impactful. It's becoming more central to a lot of the social studies teachers' approach to the classroom, and
Yeah.
they they embrace it full stop.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, in this article, you have, according to the website, quote, the Zinn Education Project promotes and supports the teaching of people's history in classrooms across the country. For more than 10 years, the Zinn Education Project has introduced students to a more accurate, complex, and engaging understanding of history than is found in traditional textbooks and curricula. With more than 130,000 people registered and growing by more than 10,000 new registrants every year, the Zinn Education Project has become a leading resource for teachers and teacher educators. So, in the article, you list off a number of examples of the lessons offered by the Zinn Education Project. So, maybe we should just take a look at some of these. So, you picked out three of these. Look, I'm just going to read off some of what you wrote here. So, or no, actually, this is just copy and pasted from their website.
Straight from the website.
Straight from the website. So, students design a reparations bill. In this activity, students take on the role of activist experts to improve upon a congressional bill for reparations for Black people. They talk back to Congress's flimsy legislation to design a more robust alternative. That sounds like a very non-slanted lesson plan at all. The red dot of environmental racism. A teacher looks back on her childhood to discover the meaning of environmental racism. Linda Christensen offers ways to teach about the students, about the story with students. Well, that sounds fun. And you were saying right before we hit record on here that there's actually a website that's just dedicated to all this, probably where you copy and pasted it from, that has a ton, an
Hundreds.
absolute ton of these lessons plans. So let me find this right here. I've got it open right here. So if you're watching this video, you can see that here we go. That it's not limited to just environmental racism or reparations or anything like that. It looks like we've got a whole host of different topics that you can find lessons plans for, from African American art and music, Asian American, civil rights movement, climate justice, criminal justice, incarceration, democracy and citizenship, disability, economics, education, environment, food, housing, immigration, so on and so forth. Goes everywhere. So I'm just going to click on something random here. Let's do math. So let's see what lesson plans that they have for math here. Oh, maybe the website's overloaded with teachers trying to find their lesson plans for this upcoming semester. All right, well, I don't know. While that loads, we could just probably talk a little bit more about. Oh, wait, here it is. Okay. Plotting inequities or inequalities, building resistance. High school students use math to reflect on social inequality. I mean, come on. That's literally the first one that popped up. There's
Right.
nothing hidden in my sleeves. This was literally what first popped up. Solar power comes to math class. Like, again, no, we're not learning 2 + 2 = 4 here. All of this has a, social justice warrior agenda attached to it. It's pretty
Exactly.
astonishing.
Exactly. And I don't I don't completely disagree with the fact that these topics should be brought into the classroom. However, I think they should be done in a neutral fashion. So instead of saying design a bill for reparations, how about saying, should we have reparations?
Right.
And then have the students make up their minds. But what they're doing is they're planting the seed that we should have reparations, and they're not even addressing whether or not reparations are discriminatory or unnecessary, or whether the students agree with them in the first place.
Yeah, no, it's just a given. It's just an
Right.
absolute given.
Right.
How dare you suggest otherwise? So, Now, this is all just the beginning. You say that the Zinn Education Project is a relatively tame compared to the work of the 1619 Project and critical race theory, which is kind of, the buzz of the town when you look into these topics as of late. So, describe what you're seeing in our education system from your vantage point.
So 1619 Projects is predicated on the fact that the United States was not founded in 1776. It was founded in 1619 when the first African slave ship arrived to Jamestown carrying what became uh, African slaves. I think they were indentured servants actually at the time. So the 1619 Project tries to say that America was not founded upon personal freedom and liberty. It was founded upon slavery, and that is not true. The founding fathers believed that slavery would actually die out after like their generation. They put a stop to the slave trade. I mean, they were under the impression that eventually slavery would wither away and die on
Mhm.
its own. So this idea that the United States was founded to strictly to perpetuate and protect slavery is just completely factually false. And then we've seen critical race theory become the latest and greatest thing in classrooms across America, and that to me is even worse because it teaches kids that aside from nothing but the color of their skin, that is the defining quality. And if you're born a white person, you are born an oppressor, and if you're born a non-white person, you are born an oppressee.
Right.
And we should not be teaching our kids that. We should be teaching our kids what Martin Luther King wanted, future generations to understand. You judge people by the content of their character. The color
Yeah,
of their skin has nothing to do with anything.
it's really like interesting, and I feel like this isn't even just limited to our education whatever system. It's like when we talk about the news, like the media or something, CNN, like whatever happened to just like reporting facts, like not reporting opinion disguised as facts. And I feel like that's what we're seeing with all of these cases, whether it's the Howard Zinn stuff or the 1619 Project or critical race theory. It's all of the. It's not about presenting facts, right? It's like, when you add 2 plus 2 together, it equals 4. It's like why 2 plus 2 equaling 4 is white supremacy. Like
Right.
that's the type of system that we're in now. What
Right.
is why? Like what is happening? I just don't get it.
I think this has been happening for decades. It started in higher learning institutions, and I think it's slowly filtered into high schools, and now I think it's even filtering down into like grade schools, kindergarten. I see examples all the time of kids in first, second, third grade, and they're being told to read a book about why white kids are fundamentally bad, and we should not be doing this.
Right. It's like we've gone from teaching kids how to learn and instead of like and into a system where it's like what they're learning, right?
Right.
Yeah, it seems like, everything is kind of degenerating at an increasingly rapid pace. It seems like we're getting to a point where like teaching students is less and less of a priority in schools across the country. In the article, you say in July, for example, Oregon's governor signed a bill that suspends proficiency requirements in reading, writing, and math for high school graduates. Unfortunately, this is occurring in states and school districts throughout the nation. And this is anecdotal on my part, but I have heard recently from a school teacher in a district here in the northern part of Illinois that they're not even like able to make kids do homework anymore. They're like it's not what are they even learning at this point? It's just getting crazier and crazier by the day.
I very much agree with that. I feel that the curriculum has also been dumbed down substantially, even from when I was in high school. I think a lot of that also has to do with, this everybody gets a trophy, everybody's a winner. We can't fail kids because if they fail kids, they'll make them feel bad.
Mhm.
And I ran into that throughout my time in South Carolina because public school system doesn't want you to fail kids either because then that looks badly upon them, and it it limits the like money. So I mean, there's a lot of other stuff going on here, but I think if we just distill it down to its most simple uh, iteration, like you said, we're not teaching kids how to think. We're not teaching them how to communicate, how to critically think and
Right.
analyze.
Right.
We started spoon feeding them answers when I was like in school, and now we just like even abandoned that, and it's just that there is almost uh, no accountability.
Yeah, well, maybe this is like a self-cannibalizing thing, and it's like, the lesson plans are terrible, but they're not forced to learn it really, so maybe they won't even stick. Maybe it won't
It's
even
true.
stick.
It's true.
So let's get into the second part of the headline, second part of your op-ed's headline, which is, "Can parents stop it?" So, I mean, it seems like there's a pretty big problem here. It seems like this is decades, if not longer, old in our education system. So I don't know. What do you think? Can parents stop this?
Of course. And I think we're seeing two ways that parents are stopping it literally as we speak.
Hmm.
One is they are going to these school board meetings and they are finally making their voices heard. And a lot of them are going to be running for these school board positions.
Mm,
So that's one. And then the other one is homeschooling.
right.
We're seeing a lot of homeschooling, and we're seeing a lot of school choice. We're seeing a lot of states finally embracing that, and especially with the pandemic and everything that the parents saw actually going on in the classroom because it was happening in their living rooms. I think we might be at a pivot point here, and parents, of course, they can stop it. If these are their children, they just need to take, the initiative and just say, we're sick and tired of this. We're not going to let these, bureaucrats and unions, teach our students this garbage.
Yeah, a former colleague of ours would always say that he thinks that education is the most important topic that we cover at the Heartland Institute. And at first, I kind of dismissed it because he was an education guy. But after a while, I was like, yeah, I think he's right, because it really is the foundation of all of this. What our kids learn today is what they put into the world later when they're adults, right? So, uh,
Totally.
the education choice thing you mentioned, I mean, that if you that to me seems like the solution, just on a systemic level. I mean, on an individual level, like you said, putting your kids in private school or just homeschooling or getting involved in the, parent
PTA.
teacher
Yeah.
stuff like that. Like, that's obviously very important on a systemic level. Education choice, I think, is the way to go. And if you look at it, the amount of education choice stuff, whether it's school vouchers or education savings accounts or, charter schools and all of that, if you look at like a chart of those programs being implemented in states across time, it's like going parabolic. And I don't
Right.
know what happened during the COVID years, but it's a movement, and it's a movement that is gaining momentum. So hopefully that becomes a force that kind of pushes back against some of the miseducation movement that you're talking about in this op-ed. But it just depends on how much people that are listening to videos like this want to get involved. So, uh, Chris, we're running short of time, but is there any other kind of last bits of info or any other things that you want to put out there before we kind of sign off for this segment?
No, I think you really made a great point where you said that today's leaders are coming from these institutions. So we're seeing a lot of human resources departments and other institutions going full bore on this pretty crazy stuff. And I think that's because that's what's been happening in college campuses for the past decade or so, and it's actually starting to bear fruit in the real world. And we need to make sure that we are not letting that take over not only like our human resources departments, but especially our education.
Right, absolutely. All right, I think that's going to do it for this segment of Stopping Socialism TV. If you want to read this op-ed in full, you can go and check out the link in the show notes. We'll put it right underneath this video. You could also find much more of Chris Talgo's work if you go to different websites across the internet, whether it's Town Hall or The Hill or, I don't know, where are other places that you're published routinely?
I just want all of our users to go to heartland.org and stoppingsocialism.com.
Yeah, those are probably the easier places to go.
Yes,
So,
yes.
stoppingsocialism.com. We also have if you want to see more videos like this, you can subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Stopping Socialism TV. You can also find most of our content shared across social media, Facebook, Stopping Socialism. We have an Instagram account. We have a Twitter account. We have a Parler account. So, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Stopping Socialism TV, and we will talk to you next time.